yes, we need to consider how our interactions online and in person differ. And I do think often people need to remember that the people they talk about online or talk to online are real humans with feelings too. But this is just such a bad and poorly explained example. I don't think he even really knows what he's trying to say.
And a clear thing I got to say here too, what people think about you on the internet means nothing. And I know that it's the common thing to say, like, oh, I don't read the comments, I don't care what people think. Obviously everybody does, but they care until they don't. You read the comments and you do get hurt by them until you don't, because you get so worn down by them that you eventually learn not to care about the comments. Because
okay, so I guess he won't be bothered by the fact I'm making this video or anything I'm saying in it, right? But here's the thing I think he's forgetting. Online actions do affect the real world. For example, the reason I'm making this video and calling out so much of his online content is because, one, all the misogynistic things he says online are going to teach other men that they should be thinking in this way and behaving in this way, and that will negatively impact how those men treat women in the real world. His online content is creating dangerous men, which will affect women in the real world and online. And two, secondly, his online behavior is an indicator of his real life behavior. We see all of his contempt for women online. We see his misogyny. We see his lack of boundaries and respect for women. So it's no surprise that in the real world, he constantly shows all those things to women as well, and is, unsurprisingly, a convicted rapist. We can't separate his online and real life worlds because the behaviors do influence each other. Lisa Segura talks about this in her book, The Incel Rebellion, The Rise of the Manosphere and the Virtual War Against Women, and references feminist blogger Emma Pittman when she writes, and this is a little bit long, but bear with me, it's important, and I have points to talk about it. So Lisa writes, The human pyramid of misogyny suggests viewing misogyny as a spectrum is problematic due to it not being a sliding scale of harm, with jokes situated at the low end and rape at the other. The notion of a pyramid instead, where minor acts support the major, creating at best a foundation of blithe indifference and at worst a culture of amusement at women being belittled, provides another avenue for thinking about why it is that even seemingly small acts of sexism, violation and harm must be seen as inherently connected with sexual assault and rape. Misogyny endures because it is collaborative, and it is preserved via embodied structures of societal support that individuals actively uphold, especially those with political, legal, or cultural capital to effect change, but choose not to. Pittman describes the way that rapists and sexual harassers are able to stand on the shoulders of others, and she means mostly, though not exclusively, the shoulders of men. So this is the bit that's quite long, but please bear with me. She writes, on the bottom of the pyramid are the silent bystanders who observe sexism, harassment, and even abuse, yet do nothing. Their silence might be down to pure ignorance or indifference, or affected by external factors such as intimidation. However, the impact does not differ. Silence equates complicity, creating a foundation for other men to evade retribution. Above them are the men who laugh along and find amusing the sexist "women belong in the kitchen" or "make me a sandwich" comments, along with rape jokes, because they're abstract, dark, and edgy humour. They dismiss the lived experiences of statistically 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men, as well as emboldening the perpetrators who, via their hilarity, feel reassured that their actions are not really that bad. On their shoulders are those men who go a step further and join in on the joke. Then there are the apologists, those who, when a woman discloses an experience of sexual violence or harassment, dismiss it as a misunderstanding, provides an excuse or responsibilities, or blames the woman instead. They view feminism and conversations about sexual predators, as per #MeToo, and tackling sexual exploitation as witch hunts and going too far and demonizing men. On top of this are the men who become aggressive in response to being turned down, calling women's names like prick tease or accusing them of leading them on. The sexual harassers at work, on the street, and those who make rape or violent threats online against women. The voyeurs who take pictures of their sexual partners without their consent and send them on to their mates. The stalkers, the men who try to constantly monitor and have complete control of their targets' lives, both online and offline. Then there are what Pittman refers to as the brokers of power, the men who are actively working to protect the structural interests and remind women of their place and quash allegations with reminders that women will be disbelieved, such that women do not report their victimizations. It is these persons who provide institutional support for abuses to occur. Then there are those who commit the indecent and sexual assaults through to the rapists, and on top of the hierarchy, ably supported by other behaviours from the benign to the more sinister below them, are those sexual predators who have such power that they are protected and to an extent visible. So I know that was a lot, but when we hear all that, it's easy to see how a man like Jack started at the bottom of the pyramid and was enabled at each step until he got higher and higher. He was supported by others along the way, and now he continues to support and enable others, both above and below him. We've heard him made sexist, women get in the kitchen jokes. We've seen him demonise women and feminism. We've seen him harass women in public and call them names when they turn him down. We know he is convicted of raping at least one woman and has been accused by another. So his misogynistic jokes and his online content aren't just silly, inconsequential stuff online. It all plays a larger role in rape culture as a whole. Him getting away with the smaller stuff enabled him to move on and do more of the bigger stuff, and to some extent get away with it. And him doing all this stuff online enables others to be able to do the same thing. Anyway, the rest of the video is just him rambling for 40 minutes without saying anything new, and it's frustrating because in videos like this one, there is some underlying stuff that would be interesting to talk about, but Jack just keeps missing the points and never says anything useful. I just don't think he's intelligent enough to have real in-depth or nuanced discussions about these topics. He doesn't really fully understand what he's talking about. And this is kind of the problem with people like Jack, right? Not only their stupidity, but the fact that in a lot of what he says, there's some little moments where you're like, oh, actually, maybe that's an interesting topic. Oh, maybe that's a good point. Because they use legitimate arguments amongst their covert and sometimes just overt misogyny to make even their harmful views seem more legitimate. So Clementine Ford writes about this in her book Boys Will Be Boys, where she says, men's rights activists are slightly more worrisome breed of creep because they use some of the genuine issues men face as a sort of Trojan horse by which they can sneak a far more insidious agenda into the public discourse. MRAs are capable of recognising the harm that patriarchy does to men, the increased risk of suicide, the shunting of their emotional selves, the substantial impact that violence has on men's lives, but instead of working with feminists to dismantle this system of structural oppression, they've identified women as its source. The curious logic of the average MRA holds that feminism and the fight for women's liberation is not only unnecessary because women obviously have more power and privilege than men because we can have sex whenever we want. Yes, this is really an argument that some of them earnestly expound, but that every harm identified by feminism can be countered by an equal and opposite harm being enacted by women against men. I personally think there's a strong argument to be made for the fact that Jack Densmore is the embodiment of toxic masculinity, which is a phrase that we hear increasingly often, but a lot of people seem to misunderstand what it means. Toxic masculinity does not mean that being masculine is in any way inherently toxic. There is absolutely nothing wrong with masculinity or being masculine. What it actually refers to are behaviours and attitudes of hypermasculinity that stress virility over cooperation and violence over compassion, according to Gail's book, Misogyny, The New Activism. Oh, and all the books that I'm mentioning in this, along with other sources and further reading, there's some articles, there's some studies, there's also, it's all in a source document down below, and also some extra videos you can watch that I might have mentioned. Toxic masculinity is harmful to everyone, including men, as it implies there is only one correct way to be masculine and shames anyone who falls outside those narrow confines. That is a problem. Gail's book lists several masculine norms which are upheld by toxic masculinity and outlines how they can be harmful. For example, she talks about how men are taught that to be masculine means to have emotional control and how self-restraint was to be admired and imitated. But in reality, when this becomes toxic, this actually leads to men simply suppressing their emotions to their own detriment or shaming others for expressing their emotions in healthy ways. Emotional control can be healthy, but when it progresses to emotional suppression, it can be dangerous and destructive and often lead to violence. And I think a lot of these attitudes are demonstrated in Jack's video, 7 types of men you must avoid, brackets, make you weak. Let's take a look at some clips.
People that get easily offended. These are the guys that get triggered by everything. They take everything personally. This was me when I was in high school, guys. I remember being like 15 or 16 years old, and me and my buddies would be making jokes. And every once in a while, they'd make a joke about me that just drove me nuts. I got so angry, I literally wanted to fight them. I was so triggered and emotional. As I got older, I started to work actual real-life jobs. And when I was on a construction site, everybody's mean to you. Everybody breaks your balls all the time. And if you get easily offended, you don't last a week because they're testing you. They want to see how tough you are. They want to see if you're a wimp or an actual guy that can keep his cool and make jokes back. Because wimps and weak people are useless to society.
So the very first thing he's saying is basically don't show emotions, especially if those emotions are hurt or upset. And this is so dangerous for men. This is just toxic masculinity right here. Telling men to bottle up their feelings, never express them, and to stay in unhealthy, unsupportive environments is a huge part of the reason why men's mental health is in the toilet, and it needs to change. A person, whether they're a man or not, should never be afraid to express how they're feeling or say to someone, hey, I'm pretty uncomfortable with that thing you just said for X reason. Can you please not? The legend that is Bell Hooks wrote about this in her book, The Will to Change, and she said, in many ways, the fact that today's boy often has a wider range of emotional expression in early childhood, but is forced to suppress emotional awareness later on, makes adolescence all the more stressful for boys. Tragically, were it not for the extreme violence that has erupted among teenage boys throughout our nation, the emotional life of boys would still be ignored. Although therapists tell us that mass media images of male violence and dominance teach boys that violence is alluring and satisfying, when individual boys are violent, especially when they murder randomly, pundits tend to behave as though it were a mystery why boys are so violent. She goes on to write, much of the anger boys express is itself a response to the demand that they not show any other emotions. Anger feels better than numbness because it often leads to more instrumental action. Anger can be, and usually is, the hiding place for fear and pain. So, please ignore Jack. If you're a man watching this, please ignore Jack. Do not suppress your emotions until they erupt as violence and anger. Instead, learn to listen to yourself, feel your emotions, and express them in a healthy way. There is no shame in whatever emotions you're feeling and going through. There's something that everyone has to work through on their own in their own way. There are healthy ways to express them and work through them.